They are following the idea of a China dictatorship, make no mistake about it, using technology to monitor the people completely, make no mistake about that, and put it under this umbrella of the Chinese way.
Steve Rodan has been a journalist for more than 40 years, receiving awards in Israel and the United States for his writing. He and his co-author, Ellie Sinclair, have written the groundbreaking book, In Jewish Blood, The Zionist Alliance with Germany, 1933 to 1963. It's available on Amazon. Lately, he's been writing articles on the topic of China in the Middle East. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on this show. Now, Steve, it's good to have you on. I want to know, everybody's talking about China. Everyone is fearful, what kind of power is this? Do we really have to worry? Does China own the Biden family? Let me look at a few more things here. China has bought up companies and industries in other countries and is taking them over. By the way, in Israel, it bought up Tenuva, I understand, which is the biggest company, I believe, for dairy products here, milk, etc., in Israel. We hear that China is in cahoots with Russia and Iran against the United States. We hear about the Chinese social credit system, which is very worrying, and that might spread to the rest of the world. And we hear about the Uyghurs and genocide, and we hear that perhaps the dollar is going to be stopping to be the international currency used to purchase oil, and that they're going to go to the yuan, the Chinese currency instead, which is going to kill the dollar, which is definitely going to bring America into a tailspin. What does all this mean? What do we need to be afraid of? What is rumor? What is true? What is false?
Okay, Tamar, first of all, we don't need to be afraid of anything. We have a God above. He runs the show, neither China, Russia, Putin, or any of these guys. We run the show. God runs the show. China is not an emerging superpower. China is a superpower. China owns a huge part of the world's wealth. China contains much of global industry. China has a very cozy and profitable relationship with two of the biggest energy suppliers in the world, Russia and Saudi Arabia, and might I add, Iran as well, although it is small. So China is coming into something which it never has done, at least in modern history, a superpower with power projection far beyond its borders, particularly in the Middle East and Africa. Yes, the Chinese, with all of its economic power, wants to move away from the US dollar to its own currency. And it is happening, not will happen, it is happening. China and Russia do not deal in the dollar in their energy transactions. Saudi Arabia will probably be next, and that will hurt the dollar significantly. What it means for us in Israel is that our obsessive dependence on Washington is fading. Our obsessive dependence on the United States is dissipating, and we have to be ready. And there are many who are already planning for this. We all have to be ready for a power shift, which will bring both economic and strategic change.
For the good or for the bad?
China is not America. And here is the main difference between China and America. China tells its client states, I don't care what kind of system you have. I don't care how you run your country. What I'm interested in is one thing. My interests, whether it's in promoting and developing infrastructure for the Chinese global trade called the Belt and Road Initiative, whether it's that your country will be a recipient of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or maybe millions of Chinese laborers. Make no mistake about it. Chinese power is no less than US power, but they don't speak about ideology, about governance. We just want what we want. Now, the difference here is that if you play ball with China, they don't care who is the leader. With the United States, it's more nuanced. So I don't know how China will respond here. China has responded imposed itself quite heavily in such countries as Ethiopia, Sudan, Djibouti. It is spreading rapidly in Egypt, which is a next door neighbor. It is heavily into Syria, a next door neighbor. How it will be in Israel, in my opinion, it is much more on the level of, if you're stable, we will come in with major projects, which we will control. China does not believe in other people controlling his project. Tanuva is a good example. Tanuva has been bought by the Chinese, not because Tanuva is a profitable company or not, but because the Chinese badly need food, badly need dairy supplies, and they are taking Tanuva, replicating Tanuva in China, and then once they have that, they can close up shop. And that's what they've done, by the way, in much of Europe.
When you say close up shop, what does that mean exactly?
That means that once they suck out the technology, the expertise, the assets, there's no reason to run Tanuva in a foreign country. And that's what they're doing in Europe. They bought Volvo, for example, in Sweden. They're taking all the production out, putting it in China. And now Volvo in Sweden has been transformed basically into a sales office for Europe. But the production, development, that's gone. That's in China now.
So I'm wondering, China is such a huge country. They've got billions of people. With all the land that they have, with all the, you would think that they'd be able to import cows, reproduce them, and have their own dairy production that would be independent from the rest of the world. Why do they have to come to Israel and take Israel's major dairy production company?
China is a big country. China is a very rich country. But China lacks expertise and technology to do it themselves. And they do not want to be dependent on anybody. They want to do it themselves. The importance of Israel to China is about one thing. You have it, technology, expertise, and a very important thing, the ability to administer and develop projects, which is not there at this point in China. And so what they've done is, even today, especially in the intelligence and security field, is they bought not just technology, they bought technology with the expertise to apply it. That's where Israel comes in. Israel is considered today, shall we call it, the world's laboratory for technology in the areas of communications, in the areas of radar, in the areas of weapons. And that is what China wants. It doesn't want to import weapons. It has been doing that until now. And the United States has been a very happy supplier of weapons. They want technology. And that's where Israel comes in.
I understand that China is selling weaponry themselves.
Of course, you buy, you develop, You build, and what do you do afterwards? You market. And that's what they're doing. Again, the weapons exports by China is not about money. China makes far, far, far more money with other things. China's diplomacy is about selling cheap weapons, and during the last 2 years, cheap vaccines for COVID-19. In fact, not cheap, free. China is giving out free vaccines to many, many countries because the West wanted big money and the developing countries said, we can't afford it. Comes in China and says, we'll do it. And it was a very smart move because maybe they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars, but the amount of friendship, the amount of credit they're getting with the people of the area, not just the leaders, is very, very high.
I want to ask you about the Uyghurs, that there's people are talking about how they've been taken away, put in concentration camps. There's a genocide going on there. Tell us more.
China is not a country that was made 200 years ago or 300 years. It is an ancient civilization. It is an ancient civilization with an ancient philosophy, Confucianism. It does not see itself as a Europe, and especially not in America. In fact, it is much more, in their understanding, much more akin to the Jewish people, in that we're talking about an ancient civilization that has continued. Now, the Uyghurs in China are a Muslim minority, and they are a majority in their area. And they want to keep their Muslim faith, and they want to make decisions for themselves, especially regarding education, culture, and even economy.
And even?
Economy. The economy. Now, the Uyghurs also have patrons, sponsors, most of them in the Gulf, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and they're pouring a lot of money into the Uyghurs to make them their sort of Muslims. Chinese don't like that. Turkey has very close relations to the Uyghurs, sending them a lot of money as well. China doesn't like that. That's considered an infringement of Chinese sovereignty. And so they're doing two things. On one hand, there is a campaign of harassment and maybe even persecution of the Uyghurs. On the other hand, they're going to Turkey and saying, hey, if you play ball with us, you will receive a lot of economic incentives from our projects, particularly Belt and Road Initiative, which envisions ports, highways, and many bridges, and many other infrastructure that a lot of these countries, including Turkey, can't afford. So there's the carrot, which is the big money, and there's the stick, which is if you don't cooperate with us, we'll go somewhere else.
What you're saying sounds to me almost like an excuse for what China's doing to the Uyghurs, because it would seem to me, I'm not familiar with the subject, but it would seem to an average person, myself, that if you want to cut the political control from other countries by bringing in money, that they just stop the money flow, and or they stop the person who's the head of the community there from who and is receiving the money, they arrest him. But to take in thousands of people and they disappear, and there's rumors that they're killing them, that there's a genocide going on there, that sounds to me a lot different than what you were saying.
I am not apologizing for China. Make no mistake about it. The Chinese play hardball. They play hardball. When they want something, they get it. And if it's considered an internal threat, they deal with it brutally. They do not deal with it through the Court of Human Rights. So I want to make that very clear. What I'm trying to say is that the Chinese will not tolerate an autonomous ethnic minority They will not tolerate it. Again, I am not speaking whether they should or they shouldn't, but they will not tolerate it. Regarding the money flow, the Chinese have tried to stop the money flow. Not easy. Not easy stopping money. You can ask what's going on in Israel about that as well, in other areas, because Hamas receives plenty of money. Fatah receives money, and even gangs close to ISIS receive money here. I'm talking about an overall policy in which China tells the countries that fund the Uyghurs, if you want to play ball with us, then stop what you're doing and don't provoke. If you don't want to play ball with us, we have plenty of options that will cut you out of our huge, again, the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, is $1 trillion. That's something which is frankly unimaginable.
Explain to our listeners what exactly that is, so they understand.
China is now developing a global network. It's under the guise of trade and economy, but it has great repercussions for military and security. So the Chinese are moving west from China, Pakistan, the Gulf, Iraq, Syria, either Israel or Lebanon, Egypt, the entire African coast called the Horn of Africa. And the idea is that all these countries allow two things: allow China to build and allow China to export labor. Don't forget, China cannot take care of 1.5 billion people. They can't. I don't think there's no country that can. So what it does is it exports labor. Millions and millions and millions and millions of people. And these people are smart. They know if they get out of line, they'll lose their jobs. So they shut up. Their families know that the breadwinner outside China, if they open their mouth, will lose their breadwinner. So they shut up. It's a very effective tool for control. So BRI is not just about an economic element. It's about control, both in China and in the strategic areas. They don't need Europe. The Chinese do not need to do BRI in Europe. Why? Because the Chinese are looking for minerals. Oil is number one. Metals, gold, all these things, food. China is growing a lot of food, by the way, in Ethiopia. Why? Much of China is not arable. It cannot sustain major agricultural because it's so polluted. Much of China is so polluted, nothing grows. So they have to go out or else collapse.
Okay, so to take that a little bit further, again, I'm just an average person, but I would imagine that having the power to build ports, which are going to, as you said, employ thousands of Chinese that they're going to export to these different countries and ports and working. And they're going to have this major control that could chokehold a country if they decide to close these ports. They'll be able to almost threaten the economies. They'll have real leverage there, but also they would have built-in soldiers already in place if China decides they want to take over a country, or at least hurt it a lot so they can have more time to send forces over to take it over if they wanted to. They've got soldiers planted right there. And what's to stop them? I mean, you're saying that there's no real interest of China to take to control Europe, but why not? I mean, if they have that much power, why not just make yourself an empire, make yourself ruler of the world, have your new world order, but under a Chinese government? I mean, why not?
That's exactly what's happening today, Tamar. The Chinese are smart. They exploit the economic the economical weakness of countries, particularly in Africa, where there is a huge, the riches of minerals, that is vast. They do that by co-opting, bribing is a better word, the leadership, and they're there. Then they build railroads, as you said, highways, everything. They run it. They have now millions of workers. There are millions of workers, not thousands, in Africa. And you're right. Those workers can turn on a country if need be. In Europe, it's more economic because in Europe, there's much more immigration control. And by the way, you don't have to be everywhere. But in Europe, it's much of the industry of Europe has gone. Where is it? In China. If there's a problem, and we see that now with Ukraine, if there's a problem with energy, Russia says, oops, you're not getting it. And the same thing goes with China. A problem between Europe and China, China can say, oops, you're not getting computers, you're not getting basic goods which you depend on us for. So yes, the answer is there is a Chinese empire. Some of it is obvious, and some of it is less obvious.
Where does America come in?
America doesn't come in. And that is the concern, the belated concern, because they knew of this already, I would say 30 years ago. China's push to be what it is today started in earnest in the early 1990s. And its push to be an economic power and a military power is something that has been seen for a long time. Its patience has been outstanding. It's the fact that it has not destroyed or conquered Taiwan, which it could do, in my opinion, in 20 minutes, is astounding. They'll do it, but they'll do it their way. So the point is, America has been sidelined. The irony is, it's not been sidelined by the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union, which was the threat in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's been sidelined by a combination of economic empire of China combined with the energy and nuclear empire of Russia and Iran. So those three countries are together now. China, Russia, and Iran. And between them, they are extremely powerful.
So so when you talk about America, are we talking about all the Americas, North, Central, and South America? It's just not, you're saying it's just not in the interest of China to take notice of them?
Oh, China is taking very much notice of America. America is a huge, huge market for China, a huge market. So China is in a balancing act. It does not want to provoke America, certainly not to a military confrontation. It does not, because with America and a military confrontation, you don't know how it's going to end. You know, you may know how it will begin. You don't know how it will end. Every single country that's tried to deal with America, whether in World War I or World War II or Korea, has found that out. Yeah, and they've all dismissed America as too far, too weak, too divided. And frankly, they've all been wrong. So China is the people who run China are no dummies. They know that. They will not, and are not trying to provoke America, but they will not let America control them.
What does China have to do with the Russian-Ukrainian war? China
and Russia are very close. Again, something which has defied all predictions. All predictions. Everyone said China and Russia are rivals. They have major border disputes. They don't like each other. Civilizations are completely different. Never. They'll never reconcile. And you know what? They did. They did because their joint interest is stopping or marginalizing America, the United States of America. And there they have come together. Russia is one of the biggest energy suppliers to China. There is no question about it that any Western sanctions on Russia will not stop China from importing Russian oil and natural gas. It will do it in different ways. It will go through different countries, but it will not stop. 2, the dollar. China and Russia do not trade in the dollar anymore, especially in energy. They trade either in the ruble or the yuan, which means that US sanctions on Russia, the economic sanctions, will not have a major effect. And don't forget, there's Iran as well. And Iran is also a strong, strong energy power. So China has supported Russia in Ukraine, again, in the Chinese way, quietly, but very effective. And so has Iran, and so has Iran's, Iran's clients. The US sanctions on Russia are not working. They're talked about and they're made a big deal in the US media, but they're not working because too many countries, including the Arab countries, including Europe, need Russia, whether it's economically, energy, or in the case of Saudi Arabia or whatever, strategic.
And in the case of Syria, militarily.
Correct.
Let me ask you about Iran and China, because it's, Iran wants to see the destruction of Israel. And yet China, I understand, is selling weapons to Iran, giving them weapons. And so how does that all work out? Where's that going to go?
China needs Iran for energy. Period. China will go along with Iran to an extent, to a point. If the Iranians need Chinese weapons, China will sell them. Chinese weapons are not state of the art. They're cheap, they're somewhat effective, but they're not state of the art. China needs Iran for Belt and Road Initiative because Iran is the gateway to the Middle East. China wants Iran's help on Afghanistan and what's going to be with Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is a route from China to Africa, and that's important. So Iran is important to China. Is Iran important enough to China so that it will destroy its relationship with Israel or the West? Probably not. But if it can dance at 2 weddings, as we say, it will.
There's talk in the West. US President Biden even spoke those words recently, New World Order. And I'm wondering where China fits in with that.
Let me tell you what the Arabs say, particularly Syria, Egypt, and Iran. They say, we have found something which we think is the answer for future governance. Communism didn't work. Capitalism didn't work. Democracy certainly doesn't work for the leadership. What does seem to work is the way the Chinese rule their country. Communism, forget that there's a communist party that rules. Communism out. Capitalism in. But what we have here is a leadership that will encourage capitalism to sustain power and to continue power. And we will follow the Chinese model. And that's exactly what Egypt is doing and some other countries. They are following the idea of a China dictatorship, make no mistake about it, using technology to monitor the people completely, make no mistake about that, and put it under this umbrella of the Chinese way. And make no mistake about it, Europe, during the lockdowns, during COVID, did the exact same thing and hopefully will not continue.
When you say they did the exact same thing, you're talking about monitoring if people left their homes during lockdowns. and using technology against their own people. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Correct. Now, it's not just whether they left their homes. They monitor what they say about the lockdowns. They monitor any opposition to government policy. This was all done during the COVID. It has been only eased in Britain because the fear that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will be thrown out. So he's eased a lot of things. But had it not been for a backlash, and by the way, in Israel, there's a backlash as well. We don't hear about it much in the press, but there is a backlash. But that is one of the biggest Chinese lessons that the West has used, which is use the Chinese method of heavy control, dictatorship, ending civil liberties, freedom of speech, and call it concern for national health. By the way, in America, big backlash now. New York has gotten rid of all restrictions, including masks. And other states don't have them at all. So again, we will see now whether the Chinese model can be applied. That is being followed, we know. Can it be applied? We will see.
But at the same time, much of the censorship has come from the West with the social networks censoring things, banning things, talk about anything against, I don't want to use certain words because I want to be able to put this up on our channel. But everyone knows what I'm talking about, silencing people. So
that's the Chinese way. That's the Chinese way. Syria couldn't do that. Syria doesn't have the technology. You watch. China will provide the technology to Syria. China will, if not already, will provide the technology to Egypt and other countries. Now you can be effective in monitoring your people and shutting your people up. It's a big, big, big boost to your regime.
All right, to wrap this up, how now does this affect Israel? Where do you see Israel going? And then I have one more question, and then we can wrap everything up.
Look, Israel has never in its history followed more the agenda of the international community. And the COVID episode has shown how far Israel will go in eradicating civil liberties under the guise of national health. If you read the news, you will see that there is no tolerance of dissent, no tolerance, not a little tolerance, no tolerance of dissent. The media, the major media, is completely linked or tied in to the regime. And so this is the Chinese way. It's, by the way, it is making the leadership authoritarian, moving it to a dictatorship. By the way, you know who said this? Not me. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this. He said, Israel is no longer a democracy. So what I'm trying to say is here that the...
What did he say that it was?
He said it. If it's not a democracy, what's the alternative? He said, Israel is no longer a democracy. He said this, you can look it up, about 3 months ago. He said, you can't speak, you can't oppose, you have no power to organize. They're trying to make demonstrations in front of Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's house, which has been declared a public institution. The cops don't let them. But look, it's a public institution. We have the right to demonstrate. No, you don't. Goodbye. That's a police state where there are no rules. They're just police. It's tough words, I'm saying, but it's a truth that both we have to acknowledge and with God's help, change. Not just acknowledge, change. As they say in Hebrew, with God's help, Bezrat Hashem, it will happen. So the Chinese model is alive and well here in Israel. That is how Israel is involved.
How do we fight it?
The Ukraine, we fight it, first of all, with devotion to God and his Torah. Now you might say, what does that have to do with anything? When you have devotion to God and his Torah, you garner, you create and generate courage. That's how these things change, not by a majority. Majority never put this in, and a majority won't take it out. But by a small but determined minority that says enough. And things will change. I am convinced of that. But if we don't have faith, real faith in God and his Torah, then we can all be bought. And many of us have been bought. Many of us. And I know people who were leading protesters a few years ago, shut their mouth. They got a little money, they got a little project going, and they shut their mouth. So with God's help, if we follow the Torah faithfully, it's all going to collapse. And we will have real democracy in this country. Bezrat Hashem.
If there's a warning that you could give to our listeners all over the world, not just Israel, in order to prevent this takeover by a power that has so little value for life that they kill their own citizens, murder their own citizens, have them disappear, put them under a social credit score system, which removes their inalienable God-given rights. It has so little value for freedom, for the world that we've all, at least in the West, and Bible-believing people have come to hold dear and value and believe in. How do we, what is the warning you need to give? How do we stop this? Because only a certain amount of people believe in the Torah. So if you had to widen this out, how would you do that? What would your warning be?
My warning is that believe in God, believe in a higher power, listen and be faithful to that higher power, and you will have the courage for two things. You will have the courage to distinguish between good and bad, which, by the way, is not so easy when there's a lot of money involved. You will have the courage to say, I don't fear you. I don't care how big you are, which is very important. Don't forget, every important revolution was about the minority against the majority, whether it was the American Revolution, whether it was the Russian Revolution, whether it was the French Revolution, and the revolution in this country in 1946, when 200, I repeat, 200 people fought 100,000 British soldiers and got them kicked out within a few months. This is a fact.
Or the Hanukkah story.
The Hanukkah story.
Judah Maccabee.
Right, the Hanukkah story. Afghanistan, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when they fought the Soviet Empire. How many of them were? 1,000. But they believed in a higher power, and they kicked the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Incredible. No one thought that. Every day they were bombing the Red Army, the Air Force, and all that, and they kicked it. This is the message. If you believe in God and go by his ways, they will not be able to buy you. And that's how they rule. They buy the big guys. The big guys oppress the little guys. Bezrat Hashem, you will see. And we all share the same God if we're honest. If we're honest, we all share the same God. And with that, we can stop the creeping dictatorship which is not so creepy. Maybe it's even galloping dictatorship that is we are seeing today.
Very empowering words. And I agree. I think that only God can solve this. I think we're so deep in the muck that we need God to redeem us. You know, kind of like when we were in Egypt, the Passover holiday is coming up now. We were slaves in Egypt. We weren't able to do this ourselves. God had to extract us out. And I'm hoping that with our belief and our devekut, our gluing ourselves to God, and having that firm belief, as you said, and not being afraid of the powers above us, knowing what's right and wrong, as you said, and going straight on that way like a horse with blinders, that we keep on and we do what we're supposed to do and not be afraid of these powerful people. And they are powerful, but God is even more powerful. So thank you for your very, very encouraging words and your whole talk about China and how it's risen. I think it's cleared up a lot of questions for people, and they have a better understanding of what we're dealing with and where this world is going. So thank you, Steve Rodan.
Thank you very much, Tamar. God bless.
Hey, everyone. To make sure you can get access to all of our interviews, make sure to hit the subscribe button on both our YouTube and Rumble channels. Your click makes us all stronger. Thanks.